I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the 33rd season of the New York Times Close-Up. This week we'll discuss what impact the influx of immigrants has been having on the city and how well the Adams administration is handling it. But first, the campaign trail. How has Donald Trump been adapting to his opponent Kamala Harris's joy offensive? What's he likely to do on Tuesday when the candidates meet in Philadelphia for the first presidential campaign debate? Will it all be enough for him to win in November? Joining us, New York Times senior political correspondent and author of Confidence Man, The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America, Maggie Haberman. Maggie, we're looking forward to the debate on Tuesday, the first presidential campaign debate of this year. The Biden debate against Donald Trump in June turned out to be decisive. What should we be looking for in this debate between Trump and Kamala Harris?
Sam, a couple of things. One is this may very well be the only debate that they have. In fact, I think that that's likely. Kamala Harris, the vice president, has not agreed to a proposed NBC debate that Trump has accepted at the end of September. So we are looking for this to be yet another pivotal moment in this campaign. Kamala Harris has a challenge in the sense that she has to navigate debating a difficult debate opponent who tends to just chew scenery and chew up whoever is on stage with him, essentially. He did not do that against Biden, notably. She has to introduce herself. She also has to explain what she would do in the future, not alienate President Biden, but also explain why they are not jointly a unit. Donald Trump is going to try to make them a unit and try to make her not just own everything Joe Biden did, but also suggest that she herself was responsible for many of the more controversial points of this administration as well, the Afghanistan withdrawal, the border crisis, and so forth.
There have been complaints that Kamala Harris has not been very specific about what her plans are. This has been, as people have said, a joy campaign, a feel-good campaign. How specific does she have to be about what she actually plans to do if she gets the chance to govern?
I think eventually she is going to be pushed to be more specific about plans. I don't know whether voters will hold that against her or find that it doesn't matter. In this debate, Sam, I don't think she has to be especially specific. These are short windows of answering questions. There's not going to be real-time fact-checking. I think that she can basically just say, broad stroke what she intends to do, and I suspect that will suffice.
And what about Donald Trump? He is often on the attack, as we know. It's a position he feels most comfortable with. He does not do well, as you have written and others have, against strong women. How far can he go in this debate in attacking Kamala Harris?
Not just strong women, Sam, but strong Black women in particular, he has struggled with, and Black women more generally, when he feels challenged. And that has presented a unique issue for him. There is a concern among some of his allies and advisors that he is going to go too far, that now the bar is low for him only because of which does not mean that, he will get graded on a curve, but it does mean that his behavior has been so extreme in so many moments that it's very hard to shock people when you're Donald Trump. There is a risk, though, that he has utter contempt for her. He has made that clear in everything he says. He's constantly insulting her intelligence. A lot of his advisors would like him to stop doing that. He is more comfortable doing it. That can really turn people off. And so we'll see what that ends up looking like.
Why has he not made a greater effort to reach out? We know he has a very strong base, that base presumably very loyal, that base presumably will come out and vote for him no matter what, but that base not enough to get him elected, presumably. Why has he not reached out beyond it?
It's not in his nature, Sam. I mean, he has really never been able to reach out much beyond his base. But I will say, even though he is not reaching out, at least in terms of his language, he is doing better with certain segments of voters than he has in the past. He is, according to polls, he's doing better with Black voters. He is doing better with Hispanic voters. A lot of that is just general environmental trends in terms of the political climate. But some of it is that, he talks about the economy, and a lot of voters have, and in broad terms, but he talks about it. And there are a number of voters who have something of a wistful memory about the time before COVID, before the pandemic, when their lives were better. He happened to be president when that was the case. They have memory hold a lot of what he did in 2020 in terms of missteps related to handling the pandemic. And so he is not doing outreach because he just doesn't really know how. It doesn't mean his campaign isn't, but he is still doing better with certain segments of the electorate regardless.
Maggie, what are the rules like for this debate, and do they favor one candidate or the other, of course, depending on whether anyone follows the rules?
Right. So there's been a debate about the rules, a debate about the debate, which is bluntly my least favorite form of coverage, but whether the mics were going to be muted as they were during the CNN debate. Now, the Biden people really wanted those microphones muted because Trump tends to, as I said earlier, just steamroll over whoever he is facing. That ended up benefiting Trump because it meant that the emphasis was on these long pauses when President Biden was speaking and President Biden's own struggles articulating what he was trying to say. The vice president's campaign, which she took over from President Biden and added some folks to it, has spent the last several days trying to get the microphones unmuted by ABC. ABC did not budge. They left the microphones muted. That is advantage Trump because one of Harris's moves as a former prosecutor is to essentially prosecute a case against whoever she is facing. She did it with Mike Pence. She was very well known for doing it in Senate hearings. They clearly know that this puts her at a bit of a disadvantage, and they've started the Harris team trying to set the expectations along those lines.
We constantly talk about, read about the polls. Do the polls really make any difference now, particularly the national polls, or should we be concentrating, for whatever that's worth, on the polls in the couple of swing states? And even there, we're 2 months away from the election. Anything can happen, as we've learned certainly the past several months. Should we really be thinking of the polls at all?
Polls are valuable as a snapshot in time, but to your point, Sam, the national polls, when the general election is on, only become valuable in terms of an indicator of what somebody's margin of victory could be like in the battlegrounds. So, for example, if either Vice President Harris or former President Trump were to beat the other, they would need a national polling average significantly more than 1%, right? It would need to be like 4 to 5 points, and it would still mean a really closely fought race in the battleground states. The battleground state polls are more important, but even there, you see a lot of variation depending on what kind of a screen the pollster is using. So they're revealing, and they tell you about sort of some movement in the race and fluidity and some trends, but they are not crystal balls. That's absolutely true.
Liz Cheney saying she will vote for Kamala Harris. Are we likely to see any other prominent Republicans bolting their party and going for Kamala Harris?
There really aren't very many left, Sam, who would. Mitt Romney is basically the last big name, and I don't actually think he's going to do something unless Donald Trump behaves in a way that Romney finds so threshold crossing that he will do so. Um, the lines are pretty drawn, and so I think Liz Cheney was really the last big name that you're likely to see.
Why wouldn't Romney say something? What happened to profiles and courage?
Well, I think that Romney actually said a lot at various points. Romney in 2016 gave a big speech describing Trump as a con man um, before he became officially the nominee. I think it was before he became officially the nominee. Romney voted to impeach. I mean, Romney has actually taken a lot of actions. I think Romney has come to the determination that one person's voice is not determinative and in some cases can actually be used as a weapon against the person they're trying to help.
We are still unsure what's going to happen in terms of sentencing Donald Trump for his conviction in New York. What impact is that likely to have one way or another on the campaign?
If Trump is not sentenced before the election, it just deprives him of sort of a galvanizing moment, right? Something that his supporters get activated about. I don't think has any meaningful impact on the election itself. You know, the vice president's allies have been concerned, frankly, about Trump being able to use the court cases and say, see, Democrats are coming after me and using the legal system. I don't think that the vice president's folks particularly want to deal with the sentencing before the election. So oddly, the two sides' interests align here.
Maggie, a last question. Abortion, the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, sort of going into contortions on that issue. Where does he really stand, and how does that affect him politically?
I think that he, in his heart of hearts, if you strapped him to a polygraph, he would support some form of abortion rights up to a certain number of weeks. But I don't think he really knows where he stands on this anymore, Sam. I think he stands wherever it's best politically to stand in his mind, and that has clearly changed any number of times. I say that about the polygraph because he supported abortion rights for a very, very long time. He is from New York. He is, his daughter was fairly liberal in her politics, and had some influence over him. So he doesn't come out of a traditional evangelical backed Republican candidate mold that we've seen in the past. But I don't know that it matters. He can't seem to figure out exactly where he should be right now.
And
It's
they
clearly
don't,
concerned about it.
and don't seem to care. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. And coming up next, we'll talk about the city's migrant crisis. On television and online, New Yorkers' fears are being stoked about the current migrant crisis. Is it just political rhetoric, or is the city losing its grip? Here to weed through the fear and loathing with me is Legal Aid Society staff attorney Josh Goldfein, and also joining us, New York Times Police Bureau Chief Maria Cramer. Welcome to both of you. Maria, tell us, how many crimes are actually committed by migrants? Is it a disproportionate number? Is it something we should be worried about?
Well, the answer to that is we don't know. And the reason that we don't know that is because the police are not allowed to ask about migrant status of people that they arrest, so of immigration status. And that means that we can't collect that data. We can't know that, for example, there's a quote unquote migrant crime wave or a migrant crime surge. What we can tell you is that police are telling us that crime remains lower than it has been. It's fallen since 2022 when there was a peak in crime, and it remains higher than it was in 2019 before the pandemic, but it's definitely falling since 2022 when we had a big surge in crime in general.
Josh, you're involved with the Homeless Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society. You would know, at least anecdotally and probably even statistically, how many of the crimes are being committed by migrants.
I would look at it the other way and say that there's no evidence of any kind of migrant crime wave, and in the absence of any real indication that that there is such a thing, there's no reason to speculate that it's going on. It's just.
So why do people speculate that it's going on? They certainly do.
I think we're in the middle of a very polarizing presidential campaign that is in part based on xenophobia and racism, stoking fear as a way to drive out votes and get people worked up. And I think that the kind of rhetoric that you're hearing around the newest New Yorkers just plays right into that narrative.
Is there any indication that migrants are committing a disproportionate amount of crime compared to other immigrants?
There's no evidence of any kind to show that. There's a lot of people speculating and trying to make people be afraid of that, but there's zero evidence that that's what's happening.
Is there any way to actually find the evidence? As Maria says, we don't really know. Is there a way to measure it statistically so that we would know?
I think that the NYPD certainly knows in their reviews of kind of where hotspots are, what kinds of problems they're having. We know that they have these regular meetings to talk about how to respond in real time to what they're seeing. And if that's what they were perceiving, then they would be addressing it in that way. And no one is saying that that's what's happening.
Maria, tell us about the case of Daniel Devon Bonilla. What went wrong in that case?
So that case is a tragic case, and what happened there was a woman, a homeless woman, who was sleeping under the boardwalk in Coney Island, was sexually assaulted by a man who was identified to be an immigrant from Nicaragua. And what our reporting found was that he had just before he had allegedly committed this sexual assault, he had been released on a prior incident. He had been held in Rikers Island for a year after he'd been accused of another sexual assault. That case became complicated by the fact that the witness in the initial sexual assault did not want to testify against him. So he was released following a guilty plea of felony assault, which is a crime that would make him deportable. But by that point, he had already been released. He was out on the streets, and shortly after his sentencing date, which he did not appear for he's accused of committing a sexual assault in Coney Island.
New York, a sanctuary city. We don't tell the feds about migrants who are not supposed to be here. How do we reconcile that in terms of migrants who might be committing a crime or prone to commit a crime?
So there already is a mechanism in place for the city to take action when there's a particularly violent crime. There's not a blanket prohibition on them and reporting to ICE for people to be detained when they're released. It seems that all the tools were in place here, but somebody just dropped the ball. That there was a bureaucratic screw up. That doesn't mean that the city didn't have the tools it needed to do what it needed to do.
So the system is in place, but it just didn't work in this case? Is that what we're saying?
In any bureaucratic process, there are going to be mistakes made, and I can't comment on the facts of this particular case, but it appears that that somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Is the system broken, or is it valid the way it is?
Well, starting from the broadest view, the immigration system itself is completely broken. There are no clear paths. I regularly consult with my colleagues who practice immigration law in individual cases, and when you see what someone has to be able to navigate in order to just find out what their status is at any moment, you see that we have a system that doesn't serve anyone, but there's no political will in Washington to change it. And so we're stuck with this chaos where there's no clear path for anyone to sort out what their status is. And as a result, you have millions of people living in limbo.
Josh, you're a staff attorney with the Homeless Rights Project of Legal Aid. What rights do homeless migrants have?
So the same rights as everyone else to not be discriminated against, certainly. And people also have a right to basic human needs like shelter. We want to make sure that people are off the street. We want to make sure that when people arrive, they're well cared for. But the vast majority of new immigrants who are coming to New York move on very quickly. Most of them don't come into the shelter system at all. They get off those buses that you read about and they meet a relative or a friend or someone they've connected with. For the people who do come into the shelter system, they tend to move out. The vast majority of people are moving out within 30 days. These folks are a major economic driver for New York, a net positive. They are creating small businesses. They are spending their money here. They are what makes the city go, and the city should look at them as a resource. We have labor shortages. We have unfilled seats in schools. Just, I think yesterday I saw the chancellor was talking about how the new arrivals have revitalized the schools. So we should be thinking of this as an opportunity rather than a challenge.
Maria, what is the impact of migrants? How many are there coming in? And is Josh right about that? Is there a net positive to their coming, despite what the mayor says about it becoming a crisis?
Well, since 2022, we've had more than 200,000 migrants come into the city, and about 64,000, I believe, now remain in shelters. That number is down from a surge of, I think, 70,000.
And do we have any idea how that compares to how many immigrants normally come into the city?
I mean, that's much higher. We know that, and that's been something that's been reflected across the country. And yes, the mayor has talked about the impact that it's had on the city, and the spending that's been needed to help the new arrivals. That number has also, we realize, the initial costs, were projected to be $12 billion. That was overinflated. It was $10 billion. And as Josh pointed out, the new arrivals have helped in tremendous ways, particularly in the schools where there were many unfilled seats. So the focus in many headlines that we see, yes, are on these anecdotes, these very frightening, high-profile incidents that grab a lot of attention. But when you drill down on the numbers, it's impossible to say that there's this surge of crime as a result of the new arrivals.
Josh, I don't want to, go ahead.
Just to clarify that the 200,000 number is the number of people who have come into shelter, but there have been many more people than that who came to New York who never even went into shelter.
That's correct.
But crossed the southern border, came on a bus from Texas or wherever, and arrived in New York and connected with the community.
I don't want to be too contrarian, but the matter of schools, why is it a plus that migrants are coming into schools? If there are fewer students in schools, can't we save money by closing some schools, having fewer teachers?
That is a whole other aspect of state finance in which the schools in New York City are reimbursed by the state on a per pupil basis. So the city ends up losing money when the schools shrink. If there were a long-term plan of the kind you're talking about, certainly the schools should be doing that. But in the immediate case, the schools benefit from having more children in them financially.
Thank you for clarifying that, because it's something that a lot of people might not understand why we need or want more students. Maria, tell me about crime in general in the city. A lot of crime, as you pointed out, is down, if not compared to pre-pandemic, then certainly during pandemic. Why are assaults up?
That's a great question. Felony assaults have been persistently up. And that's something that has remained true for the last 2 years. One of the things that I wanted to clarify in terms of the numbers and the comparison from when migrants came in 2022 is when you saw the rise in migrants coming into the city, and that was the peak of the crime. And since then, crime has actually started to fall. So if you were to try to make a comparison, you could argue that it's gone down since migrants have come in. But there are statistics that remain troubling in the city. Robberies are up, sexual assaults are up, and felony assaults are up, and that's been and the increase in felony assaults remains a steady one that can be ascribed to all sorts of problems: mental health, homelessness. There are many factors that could contribute to the rise in felony assaults.
And how does that compare to crime rates around the country?
Well, crime rates around the country are also falling. We've seen violent crime fall when it comes to homicides and shootings in the city of New York and also in other big cities. Those numbers continue to go down.
And what about crime in the subway system? Obviously, Governor Hochul, the mayor, have made efforts to curb that. The National Guard coming in. Has that had any effect?
I don't know about the National Guard because I have not seen them on the subways, and that's an excellent question. But there had been a surge of police activity or a police presence in the subway system. And yes, we've seen crime in the subways go down.
Do we know it as a result of the effort?
The police would say that it's a result of the effort, yes. I mean, you put more officers on platforms, you put more officers in subways, it would stand to reason that crime would go down. Whether that number can continue to go down remains to be seen, because you have to maintain that presence on subways and on platforms, and that's expensive.
Jeff, I know it's not exactly your territory, but stop and frisk is something that's always been controversial. Certainly legal aid has dealt with that as an issue. Do you have any sense as to the extent to which it's still going on? And is it an effective tool in getting guns off the street?
I think the outcome of stop and frisk was that New Yorkers felt that the police were against them, that they were being discriminated against, and that they were regarded as the enemy. And so we're all safer when people feel like the police are there to protect them and not to harass them. And so that's the reason why I think stop and frisk, even if it were implemented in a different way, is still going to be seen by people as an assault on them rather than a way to protect them. And so that's why we shouldn't have it.
Josh Goldfein of the Legal Aid Society, Maria Cramer of the New York Times, thanks to both of you for joining us. And coming up next, my thoughts on noise. When I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, my favorite book was The Taxi That Hurried. I relish the parts where the cabbie hunked his way through Midtown traffic to get to Grand Central Terminal on time. No more. Maybe it's accumulated crankiness, but car horns have become my pet peeve. You'd never know it, but honking your car horn, except to avoid imminent danger, violates New York City's noise code. With all the other nuisances and worse that New Yorkers endure, honking may seem trivial, but it's bad for your hearing, and it's one more assault on your mental health. The code specifies in great detail what constitutes noise, quote, an erratic, intermittent, or statistically random oscillation. The code bars air horns and gongs. It allows klaxons only on alarms limited to 3 minutes duration. The 25-page code is chock full of legal definitions and permissible decibel levels, but what's missing is any mention of how to enforce the prohibition against gratuitous horn honking. You can call 311 to complain, even report the license plate, but where's the evidence? In 2013, there were 2,294 honking complaints made to 311, according to a Times analysis. In 2023, there were 9,047. But unless the city installs more monitors that work as well as red light cameras, honkers operate with impunity. Should pedestrians be armed with air horns so they can retaliate by beeping at cars? Should car horns be reprogrammed so they can only be heard inside vehicles to relieve drivers' road rage without inflicting the din on the rest of us? Some solution deserves a fair hearing. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV smartphone app. You can catch our conversations on the go, anytime, anywhere.